What is up? Welcome to the Being Beautifully Honest podcast and channel. Thanks for being here, being subbed. If you're not, hit the button. And if you're listening on YouTube, hit the like. It's like walking in the room and hitting that light switch. Let's brighten up the place and get into the politics and BS. I'm going to share a video, but before I do, I want to go into a little bit of a history/civics lesson. And this is something that I've been wanting to do for a while now. How appropriate to do it on election day. Some may say, too little, too late, but as long as it gets out there and I say what I've been wanting to say, then I will have done my duty. So listen, all of this stuff that a lot of, especially Black people, like to say about the Democratic Party being the Democratic plantation and how the Democrats are racist and all that other stuff. I'm not here to say that there are no racist people who are registered Democrats. There quite possibly may be. I am not a Democrat, neither am I a Republican. I'm not registered for either party, and I don't subscribe to any of them. But I do know some things about history and about civics. And I want to let people know that that lie about the Democrats being the ones that were for slavery and all of those other things like that, you do know that parties, political parties, they haven't always been the way that they are now. And they are subject to change. In the future, it could be completely flipped or it could be a freaking new party. Who knows? Because it has happened before. So let's just go ahead and get into this real quick. All right, guys. The great switch, how the Republican and Democratic parties flipped ideologies. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I just really want to touch on this because I want to share a part of a video that I saw earlier this morning. The Democratic and Republican parties have not always had the same ideals that they have today. In fact, America's two dominant political parties have essentially flipped ideologies in the time since they were founded. The Democratic Party was founded in 1828, while the Republican Party dates back to 1854. In its early years, the Republican Party was considered quite liberal, while the Democrats were known for staunch conservatism. This is the exact opposite of how each party would be described today. Now, I'm not going to go into all of the history right now, but let's go here. As the war came to a close, the Republican Party controlled the government and used its power to protect formerly enslaved people and guaranteed them civil rights. This included the three Reconstruction Amendments, which won Republicans the loyalty and vote of America's Black population. Unsurprisingly, most Democrats disapproved of these measures. Again, we have to remember the parties flipped. So, Democrats, as they were known back then, would be known as Republicans today. Okay, let's continue. However, a change had begun in the Republican Party following the Civil War. Northern industrialists had grown rich from the war, and many entered politics afterwards. These new wealthy politicians did not see much sense in supporting the rights of Black Americans when the nation was still largely white. By the 1870s, many in the Republican Party felt that they had done enough for Black citizens and stopped all efforts to reform, the Southern states. The South was left to the white Democrats and their oppressive policies towards Black citizens after the Compromise of 1877 ended Reconstruction. With the end of Reconstruction, the quote, solid South voted for Democratic presidential candidates for the next 44 years. Almost 60 years later, the Great Depression became a catalyst for a massive political shakeup. The Republican Party had continued to be dominated by wealthy businessmen, which meant that they had come to favor laissez-faire policies that supported big business. These policies were effective when the economy was booming, but were disastrous when it wasn't. When the economy crashed in 29, The Republican president, Herbert Hoover, opted not to intervene, earning him and his party the ire of the American public. Franklin D. Roosevelt, a Democrat, sensed the need for change. He campaigned on a promise of government intervention, financial assistance, and concern for the welfare of the people. He won the 1932 election by a landslide. It was FDR's campaign policies that caused a major shift in party ideologies. Republicans opposed everything about FDR's government. Primarily, they saw the growth of large government as harmful to the Federalist foundation of the nation. This too has come to define the ideals of the Republican Party. Now we get to the civil rights movement. Race and equality began to return to the center of politics in the 50s and 60s. Race did not necessarily fall into a party viewpoint at this point. Instead, it was more of a regional issue. Southern Democrats and Republicans both opposed the early civil rights movement, while Northern Democrats and Republicans began to support legislation as the movement picked up steam. In 64, Democratic President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act into law. In the 1964 election, Republican candidate Barry Goldwater publicly opposed the new law, arguing that it expanded the power of the federal government to a dangerous level. And all of that talk just really was about they didn't want Black people to have rights, okay? Civil rights. The power of the federal government is getting too large. Yeah, whatever. Anyway, it was this argument that led to a final decisive switch. Black voters who had historically been loyal to the Republican Party because of the 1866 Civil Rights Act had already been switching to the Democratic Party. However, upon hearing Goldwater's argument against the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the majority of Black voters left the Republican Party in favor of the Democrats. They saw the Democratic Party as advocates for equality and justice, while the Republicans were too concerned with keeping the status quo in America. And we know the status quo in America was white men, white supremacy, racism, blacks being servants. Yes, slavery may have so called ended, but they're still servants and subservient and lower classes and separated, segregated. And they were okay with that. They wanted it to stay that way. And the white women, they benefited because that was their husbands, their fathers, their family. So by the 1980s, white Southern Democrats had become Republicans, and the majority of the South was now Republican. The Republican Party now is solidly conservative, while the Democratic Party is the liberal one. And so I tell you, all of this talk about the Democratic Party being the Democratic plantation and all of this other stuff. I'm not saying the Democratic Party is Jesus Christ and the savior of the black people, those who are minorities, but the truth is the truth. The parties were not as they are today back in the day. And another note, after the 1948 election, its leaders generally returned to the Democratic Party, at least for a time, although the Dixiecrats weakened Democratic identity among white Southerners. The Dixiecrat standard bearer, Senator Strom Thurmond of South Carolina, the state that I was born and raised in, eventually switched to the Republican Party in 1964. Strom Thurmond. And just to tell you a little bit about Strom Thurmond, who tried to run for president before, who has a black daughter. In the 60s, he voted against both the Civil Rights Act of 1964 as well as the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Despite his support for racial segregation, Thurmond denied the accusation that he was a racist by insisting he was a supporter of states' rights and an opponent of excessive federal authority. No, they didn't want the federal government telling them they couldn't have a bunch of N words as slaves and as servants. That's what they didn't want. But Strom Thurmond, who has a black daughter, probably has some other black kids out here too. But This stuff about the Democratic Party is racist and the Democratic Party, they were for slavery and all of this other stuff, and the Republicans were against it. That's not true. The parties switched. So get to know your history and some civics because this ain't it. So I'm going to share my screen and share a little bit of this video because the Republicans are the reason why Donald Trump has been terrorizing us for the last almost 10 years politically. So I'm going to share my screen with you guys. All right. So let's go ahead and play this video.
Trump is having a rough campaign closing, talking of violence against journalists this weekend, pantomiming a sex act on his microphone, and continuing the free fall since the
Look at this fool.
Madison Square Garden rally put him on defense over all kinds of attacks and hateful jokes. Now, voters have been living through the impact of Trump's first term for some time. People lived through the COVID failures, the ensuing economic collapse, his failed coup, and these abortion bans around the nation. But there are many accounts that suggest Trump is not only basically tied with Harris, but that he could end this election with more support than before. His ceiling has been typically stuck around 46 or 46.8% in the past races. You can see there, both times he drew fewer votes than the Democrat running, but famously took the Electoral College with 46.1% in 2016. And Americans disapproved of Trump as president for his entire time in office. There were historic lows. He averaged about 41%. And I want to tell you, when he left in January 21, he was at a rock bottom 34%.
And the thing that I really despise about this man, but he's a narcissist and I guess he can't help himself. He could just be like, I don't care about who doesn't like me. I don't care that my crowds are smaller at my rallies than they used to be, and I'm drawing fewer people to my rallies than Kamala has. He could say, I don't care because I like me, and there are some people that like me. Yeah, a lot of people may not like me, but he can't even admit to that. My rallies are the biggest rally. We draw the biggest crowds. Everyone loves me. Yeah, everyone's supporting me. Blah, and it's not true. He can't take an L. He cannot, his feelings are so fragile. This is not the person that needs to be in the White House that has access to all of the nuclear codes that could push a button in the heat of a moment. And he's wilding out on social media on his own Truth Social terrible business platform because somebody said something or wrote something that hurt his feelings. This is crazy.
Record lows. These are not numbers suggesting the public approved of him or wanted him at the time, let alone again. Yet, as Steve Kornacki has reported, and we saw these charts, the same nation that rejected him and saw him out the door at that 34% approval, now in surveys remembers that very same time more fondly. People now say in the United States that they give Trump's first term 48% approval. That's in the past tense, but it's far higher than the actual approval he had at the time. Now, memory is flexible. It's subjective. People thought less of Trump's first term during it, according to them. I'm telling you, their approval ratings, not the media's, not my view, but it's also been very choppy since then. People feel worse off than they did 4 years ago. The wrong track numbers in America are high. And when times are tough, it's common to look back for some better time, a type of political nostalgia, which is actually the exact messaging that conservatives have long been primed for. Ronald Reagan coined the MAGA slogan. You see it right there.
Did you know that? All he did was remove the word let's. Look at that. What a grifter. What a copycat.
Make America great again. Donald Trump later plagiarized it and added his more blunt appeals to the old days from gender to race. So right now, our special report here heading into the election is, what are people forgetting about Trump in office? Now, he could tick up to 48% and still lose, or he could win the Electoral College, but any chance Trump has at winning Tuesday's votes rests on a pretty good number of people forgetting what I just mentioned, that they did not actually approve of his time in office during that time, which is usually the best indicator, not your faraway memories later. It's while they were living through it, in contrast to what may be these inflated sort of nostalgic numbers now. Now, those are the facts about the numbers. They're not partisan. Just as many warnings against Donald Trump from the beginning, warnings that he was unfit, untrustworthy, divisive, and wholly opposed to the actual public service for the nation and sacrifice, came not as a partisan attack, but from Republicans and from conservatives back when they were speaking freely before Trump's unexpected 2016 Electoral College victory. They were based on Trump's record over the years in business and public life. They weren't based on some liberal agenda or Biden-Harris campaign that was many years in the future. It is a fact, if you put aside all of the partisan harping and skepticism about where we hear things, it is simply a public fact that we live through, that those Republicans made those warnings because we've never seen any figure in either party in the modern era draw such widespread condemnation.
He's a race-baiting, xenophobic, religious bigot.
Do you remember that? Back when Lindsey Graham has sort of a backbone, maybe a little bit of a soul left, that is all like completely vanished.
This man is a pathological liar.
The most vulgar person to ever aspire to the presidency.
I don't think he has a clue about anything.
The man cannot tell the truth, but he combines it with being a narcissist.
This is back when Republicans, these ones at least, were at least speaking some things that were true. This is back when there was some semblance of integrity. I'm not saying that they were all saints, absolutely not. But there was some semblance of integrity. And now they're singing a whole different tune.
He's a chaos candidate, and he'd be a chaos president.
He spoke the truth. And where is he today?
He's a populist, authoritarian narcissist.
Coming from a guy who is such a coward.
He has authoritarian rulings and interests and notions.
I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him.
And that man is the VP pick for Trump. I'm a never Trump guy.
Are all Republicans. Okay? His own running mate, the last voice you heard there, opposed him so much. He didn't just say, I'm a not Trump or an anti-Trump. He said he was never Trump.
They're right.
And then collapsed the meaning of the word never. And there are many more condemnations from progressives and liberals, from other types of critics, from government veterans, from nonpartisan experts. But maybe all these adjectives only go so far. There is also the facts of how Trump ran the government, how he used the power when he had it. Here are some of the documented examples. Trump failed to lead a competent COVID response. He rejected the medical leadership. He lied about the virus danger. And then he told people to drink bleach.
Right. And then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning?
Like, what adult in their right mind would suggest for any person or even an animal to drink a cleaning product or inject a cleaning product to kill a disease? Have you ever in your life heard of anything like that before? But this right here was standing behind the podium for the press room in the White House, a place that he shouldn't have even been able to have a seat in the audience asking questions, but standing behind the podium to say something like that. People, it's like, what are you doing? How could anyone, the fact that the poll numbers were even showing them being as high as they were for him is insanity to me.
Trump failed to also enact his own legislative agenda, the top items he had been pitching, from infrastructure to health care. He failed to build the wall he promised, which was the centerpiece of that first campaign. He then launched a chaotic travel ban with which courts limited. He used immigration powers to separate children from their own parents, something almost no parent and no free-thinking person says is a positive. He bent American policy towards Wall Street bankers after campaigning as a populist, from tax welfare to gutting consumer protections. He failed to appoint or maintain qualified officials. With so many people quitting or getting fired, he had the record of the worst turnover in modern American history. More on that in a moment. He was repeatedly caught abusing power for his own benefit, routing foreign and domestic government funds to himself and his companies, demanding prosecutions of his opponents.
And he should be in prison for that. I don't know. That alone, people, is something that I would never understand how they allowed to get by. And nothing is even really mentioned about that. Except, right here where it's mentioned. But nothing has been investigated and has been prosecuted with how he has used that power that he had to benefit him and his family financially. I talked a little bit about it before, but that alone is something that infuriates me when I know how so many people have suffered under his policies and under his administration.
Taking down Ukraine to go after the Bidens. He staffed the courts in order to end Roe, paving the road for those Trump abortion bans. He used his bully pulpit to clearly coddle and equivocate on white supremacy at Charlottesville. He encouraged violent militias like the Proud Boys. He routinely divided and denigrated his fellow citizens. People know and remember that. Trump ran the most criminal operation since Nixon, who, of course, was run out of the White House.
I wasn't around during the years of Nixon, but when I used to hear about Nixon, I mean, they just made it sound like he was Satan himself. This man makes Nixon seem like a saint. Seriously.
During one term in office, Trump has seen 20-some aides indicted, a dozen convicted, several incarcerated, and many more now awaiting trial, including his own most serious trial for federal felony offenses for the failed coup, which makes Trump the first president to ever thwart a peaceful transfer of power with an insurrection. And he lied hundreds of his own supporters into their conduct that day and later convictions and prison, even as he now very openly admits the lies because he lost the election.
And you know something? I won't even, he was wrong for what happened on that day in terms of the lies that he said, but I won't ever blame him for the actions of these adults. These were not children. These were not teenagers that stormed the Capitol. They need to be held accountable for what they did. And I won't blame him for doing that. But I will say that he incited things 100%, and he should be held accountable for the inciting. But I won't blame him for the actions that the people chose to take, because they could have stood there and just cheered him and responded to him with words. But the actions that they took, they have to take responsibility for their own actions. So I wouldn't even blame him for the actions that those people took. Yeah, they were hyped up. They were incited. They were egged on. They were feeling the moment and the emotions of what was going on. But I would not say that they can blame Trump for what they did. They can say that he influenced them 100%, but they're adults and they chose to do what they did.
I lost by one tenth of a point. But they say it was 22,000 votes.
Yes, he did lose narrowly. And he got a lot of people in trouble telling them to commit crimes, claiming he didn't lose.
So you heard that. I'm going to stop the video right there. He admitted, I lost. Even though he was on Fox News and doing the sit-down interview with Brett Baier, and Brett Baier clocked him on it and said, even though I wanted you to win, you lost. And he was still saying, we won and we're still having it investigated. The man is delusional and crazy. I'm so ready to turn a page on him. It is election day. If you have not cast your ballot yet and you are able to vote, please go and vote Kamala and blue down ballot, because I'm overhearing about this man. I really just want him to go and retire at Mar-a-Lago, go play golf. Hopefully you won't have any more attempts on your life. And when it's time for you to be up out of here, it'll just be God's will. But guys, thank you so much for being here, liking and subscribing. I'm Beth, just being beautifully honest. So until next time, I wanted to keep it brief, beautiful, and now I'm going to say bye.